Welcome to episode 9 of the Witz podcast. Today's expert and guest is a gentleman by the name of Brent Wagner. You are an extraordinary sales trainer and coach. The effort and the exercise today is to talk about sales. We want people walking away from today's episode with tools and techniques and, really challenging some of the myths of sales. Welcome back to the Witz podcast. We've had you here as a guest before, but we're going to do a quick intro for you in a second. We are here on episode 9. Once again, my name is Greg Witz. Our honorary guest or expert today is Brent Wagner.
Brent Wagner, yes.
Sales training, extraordinary sales coach. Anything to do with sales when it comes down to teaching and coaching, you're the shit.
You are too kind, my friend.
Well, you know what? We try to associate ourselves with, better golfers.
Fair enough. And likewise.
Amazing. So today's episode, we're going to be talking a lot about sales. It's a topic we get a lot. And I think with what we see online today, there's a lot of people touting stuff. We go through sales training and we learn some old school techniques. So I think today's episode is to, remove the myths of what's working in sales and what's not working in sales, look at tools that actually are effective in what we call the relationship economy today, hopefully have some advice and guidance for the audience on what they can do to be sales superstars. So with that being said, for the people that don't know who you are, tell us your story. Who are you? What do you do?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Brent Wagner. I have a couple of different businesses, actually. I have a keynote speaking business that I run under Brent C. Wagner. And I've just launched a business called Launchpad Facilitation, which is my training and coaching business. So I've spent about 20 years in financial services in the corporate world and seen a lot of what works and probably learned a lot more by what doesn't work, quite frankly. And, the last few years, I really have been ramping up my business in the training and speaking world and loving it. I wish I'd done it a long time ago. But the one thing that's really bubbled to the top in terms of a theme for where I've been going with the content is all about human potential and specifically maximizing and monetizing human potential. And of course, that has a lot of tentacles into the world of sales.
Yeah, and I think that's why we wanted to talk to you today is around the human potential. We talk a lot about making humans better humans. Yeah. We look at developing the human before the role. It's about developing those interpersonal skills. It's about developing certain things like, conscious behavior. We don't have to get into all the details, but it's about working that before working any technique. Yeah. So with that being said, let's jump straight into it. So today's world of sales, just give us a quick overview. What do you think about the world of sales that we live in today?
Yeah, I think it has changed drastically. I think it's changed a lot more quickly than people who have been in sales for the last decade were ready for. And therefore, I think a lot of people are hanging on to old techniques that just no longer work, like flat out don't work, and in many cases actually end up having the opposite effect. They repel people instead of draw them towards people. So I think that the internet, the speed with which information flows right now through social and all the other different forms of communications have just fundamentally changed the way that we sell.
Maybe we'll start with the question, is there such a thing as sales anymore? Like, can you sell someone?
Yeah. Absolutely, there is.
Okay.
It's just that it has a different meaning now.
All right, so tell us what that meaning is.
Yeah, well, okay, so what I would say is that I think there's a couple of different types of sales that we have to be very clear about. The first is what I would call a transactional sale. And that has to do with anything that is usually a one-time purchase or maybe a very, very big timeline in between purchases, right? So it might be a car, or it might be a furnace for your home, or it might be a new dishwasher, or whatever it might be. Those are transactional types of purchases.
The widget.
Exactly, the widget, the product, right. That's a very, very different sales approach than the other side, and you mentioned it earlier, the relationship economy, which I would call relationship sales. So we're going to focus, I think, a lot more of our time on the relationship sale here. And I think that the old connotation of sales really goes back to the transactional sale. That's where people tend to landmark when they think about it. But when you think about sales really right now and going forward, it really has a lot more to do with relationships. It's still sales, of course, but it's a very different way of thinking, a different mindset, and it's a different execution as well.
Let's start the conversation with sales leaders.
Yeah.
Sales leaders have it tough.
They do.
Right? Tell us, what do you think some of the biggest challenges for sales leaders in today's world?
Yes. Well, a couple of different things. Number one, I think a lot of the times the people who get promoted into sales leadership are not necessarily the right skill set. Because a lot of the times what happens is you get the star salesperson and you elevate them within the firm to become the sales leader. But it's a totally different skill set, to actually be out in the field selling versus leading a team of salespeople. And so I think the biggest mistake that a lot of sales leaders make is they try to create salespeople in their own image. In other words, they have tactics and techniques that really worked for them, and so they try to teach those to their salespeople. And yet, sales is a very personal and very unique way of actually engaging with the world. And if you don't allow for that personality to come through with people, it can be a bit of a recipe for, a lack of motivation. That's the first thing for sure.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying is authenticity.
Yes.
Is really important. And people throw that word around a lot. In fact, you actually teach something called the authentic edge. So tell us a little bit about what that is.
Yes. And actually, this is a good dovetail into what I just said there. The authentic edge is really all about what makes you as an individual unique. So separate and distinct from your career and your resume and all that good stuff. But what are some of the themes that run through your background that really make you different, that allow you to provide a level of insight and perspective that is a level above others? And I really believe that everyone has got that. The funny thing is that we spend a ton of time thinking about the differentiators for our businesses and for our products and for our services and so on. Those are the product's edge. Those are the services' edge. But we don't tend to spend a lot of time thinking about ourselves as salespeople and what really makes us unique in the way that we show up in the world.
Mm-hmm. So give me an example of that.
Yes.
I've heard you explain this to people before, and tell us that story. Tell us how I would use my authentic edge in maybe a sale.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I'll give you the example of you. Right? Having observed you for as many times as I have, I believe your authentic edge is your way to be incredibly blunt and even abrasive, some might say, from an objective perspective, but it's never abrasive when you deliver it because you have the ability to hit a message that is so straight talk and so blunt and actually have people kind of drop their shoulders and open up and still take it in. Mm-hmm. That same messaging, the exact same language delivered by another human being would probably not, and I would guess most times would not, land. That's part of what your authentic edge is.
Yeah, I get that comment a lot. It's one, my language. I'm quite the potty mouth, as people know. Yeah. But two, I do believe on hitting things hard and hitting things directly. Yes. Otherwise, we don't move. Right, and sometimes it's about moving.
And I think that's why we get along so well.
Yeah, right. There you go. So I think this is a fair way for me, a thing for me to say. No one likes salespeople, right? I think once upon a time, salespeople back in the day, generationally, go back to the 50s.
Yeah.
Right. There was a different shine on a salesperson. The salesperson was that neighbor of yours. They would spend time doing the relationship thing. And you were talking about transactional sales, and as we've sort of progressed, I think, we've gotten more and more and more to losing that shine of the good old salesperson. So, how do you think salespeople are perceived today?
What a great question. I think salespeople are caught up in a stereotype right now, which number one is fairly true for most people, But number two is also really quite negative because of the fact that whenever you hear that term salesperson, you tend to think about the person who's going to try and sell you something that you don't want or you don't need.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's what the connotation is that comes to mind. But they're going to be slick and they're going to use interesting language and they're going to use Jedi mind tricks to kind of get you to say yes. That tends to be the connotation for a salesperson. And yet those tactics just plainly don't work anymore.
So what are those tactics that we've traditionally learned as salespeople that don't work anymore?
Okay, so I'll give you two or three of them. The one that I hate the most is the ABC. Right?
Always be closing.
Always be closing. I mean, even when I heard it 10 years ago, it made me throw up in my mouth a little. Now I can't even believe that people would even utter those words.
Do you hear that? Do you hear,
for sure.
People still talk about that?
Absolutely.
Proudly?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
And it's an interesting individual that would speak about that proudly, but I do believe that it's still out there, no question.
To me, that was always just a slimy little sort of technique, right? It's almost like handling objections. I mean, one of the things I learned early in my sales career was, yes, ABCs, always be closing, but handling objections. And someone once said to me, they said, every objection that you handle well gives that person another opportunity to buy from you. And truthfully, I don't know. I like the line.
Yes.
And it kind of makes sense.
Yes.
But I don't know if I've ever able to actually experience that. Yeah. I don't know if I've personally ever been in an sales interaction where someone was objecting to certain things and I was like, had an answer for everything. So,
right.
Is that true? Is it, we teach objection handling, but
yes.
I think we do it a little differently.
We do.
Can you actually handle objections well?
You can. It doesn't guarantee you're going to make the sale, but you definitely can. And I think the difference here is instead of what people think of when objection handling comes to mind, which tends to be that cold call, right? For whatever reason, it's a number you don't get. So you just pick up the phone and somebody says, I've got this and that and the other. And you're like, no, I'm sorry, I don't have the time. Well, when would you have the time? When would be a good time to call back? Well, geez, I don't know. Well, can I just give you a 30-minute, that's what people think about when they're thinking about handling objections. Nobody wants that. They just don't want that. But I think handling objections now is really all about disarming the person who is providing the objection to you. And what that does is it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get through it or over it, but it certainly gives you the best possible chance of being able to put their mindset in a slightly different place.
Yeah. I think what I hear you saying is, there are true objections,
yes,
and there are not true objections,
yes,
right? And it's our job as sales professionals,
yes,
to understand the fact that it's not about a technique that we respond with, but it's about evaluating what the objection is.
Absolutely. And what I would say is the technique that we teach allows us to best understand whether or not that objection is purely what was said or whether it's something that's completely different or much deeper and beneath the surface, right?
So on that note, what's another old school technique that doesn't work anymore?
Yeah, features and benefits.
Features and benefits.
Features and benefits.
I haven't heard that in a while.
So, remember, you got to focus on the benefits, not the features, or if you're going to mention a feature, you've always got to tie it to a benefit. Look, I watched a YouTube video this morning on 3 different DSLR cameras to buy, and a guy who in 10 minutes gave me all of the things that I needed to know about why I would buy any one of the 3, right? I don't need a salesperson to come into my office and waste my time about that, right? So you get the idea.
And I actually, don't use this as a technique, but it's just part of what I naturally do in my conversation where I do comparisons or comparables, which is, all right, well, let's talk about that, right? Yes, there's us and there's this and this and this option as well. What is the difference between the two? And, now as the buyer, you decide which is the best fit for you, right? So I think One of the things that becomes really important for people in today's world is, to your point, let's remove the features and the benefits, and let's start to get the mindset of it's our job as sales professionals to make sure that we're educating these potential buyers. And part of the way we do so is we give them comparison.
Absolutely.
Right? Hey, here's the 3 different cameras. Here's what this one does. That's different than this one. That's a little bit different than this one. You choose.
You got it.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
We talk a lot about stop selling and start helping people buy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And it's not one of these throwaway lines. It's a very important. You got to stop selling. Right? I mean, I know I hear the salespeople when I get the duct cleaning call.
Oh boy.
Which is still cold calling, by the way. Right? I can't believe I still pick up the phone.
Yeah, that's a better question. Maybe for another day.
Because normally in today's world, we see numbers that we don't recognize in caller ID, or sometimes it's an unlisted number. And the first thing we do is we go, we're not picking it up, because what if it's an air duct cleaning person? Right? They don't deal with objections well either.
No,
right? They just
really
respond
don't.
with why not,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
let's shift there. Let's talk about outreach. Once upon a time, we learned the tool of cold calling. Today, cold calling, I think, is still useful, but rare. And there's other tools and ways we can outreach. So what was the traditional way of looking at cold calling?
Well, I mean, the one that springs to mind for me is this idea that it's just a numbers game, right? That if you have 100 dials a day and you have 40 connects, and of those 40 connects, you have conversations with 20 people for 10 seconds or more, then you should be able to book 2 meetings out of that, right? And it was literally just a formula. So you knew that every time you picked up the phone, there was going to be a certain percentage chance that a meeting was going to get booked. And certainly there was a lot of merit to that. It was just a mathematical equation. Great. Except nobody wants to be cold called anymore. In fact, it's extraordinarily abrasive for most of us to have to receive a cold call. And if anybody gets their brand out, if I'm on the phone long enough for a brand to come out, my connotation or my thought about that brand is automatically taking a negative dive when I know that they've used the cold call method. So I just don't think it's going to really work anymore.
So how do we get in touch with people?
Right. And I would say it's much more difficult than it used to be, but it's also worth the effort, because I believe your hit rate is much higher. And what I'm talking about here is I'm talking about warm outreach. That doesn't mean that you have to know the person, but it does mean that you have to have some sort of an inroad into that person, whether it's even just as simple as a second connection on LinkedIn, or whether you've had an email introduction from one of your main contacts or relationships, or even if somebody has said, look, call up so-and-so and use my name. At least then you have a good chance. The reason that you do is because people don't become abraded by a warm outreach call. They recognize what you're doing, that you need to sell, and they're much more open-minded about actually having the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think once upon a time, people wouldn't take a meeting with you if they weren't prepared to buy.
Right.
But today, where you are being introduced to someone, which is what you've defined as a warm lead or a warm outreach, people will take the time to listen.
They will. And I'll give you a great example. Yesterday, I had a great meeting with the CEO of a major financial dealership. And the only reason that I was in that office was because of the fact that a good friend of mine, who's another hockey dad, is now working at that firm. And he said, look, you should call Chris. And so I called Chris and mentioned his name. Next thing you know, I get a meeting. We had a phenomenal discussion. Good chance we're going to do some things together. So and when I first sat down with him, it was a really interesting comment he made. I said, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know you're busy and you've got a lot of things going on. But what he said was this. He said, look, I have to make time for these conversations because the world's moving quickly now, and I need to know what's out there, and I need to make sure that I'm continually connected to other firms and other competition through people like yourself. I thought that was a very interesting
Very
comment.
smart, very smart. And that comes back to what we were talking about before, which is helping people buy. Right? We're not there to sell. We're there to give comparison, right? The comparables, yes. And this was a CEO that was saying, I need to keep up with this stuff as well. Very cool, man. Very, very, very cool. So I have something called the triple threat outreach, right? Which is let's rock and roll with all forms of communication, and that's LinkedIn, Insta, and email, right? And we do all three. So I send you an email. I then chase you down on social. If you're on Insta, I put you on Insta. If you're on Twitter, I put you on Twitter. If I got you on LinkedIn, LinkedIn's easy. Most people are on LinkedIn. And then it is about the relationship. And once that triple threat happens, we kick into what we call the 18-month relationship cycle. I've committed for the next 18 months, not to chase this person, but to work in a way to build a relationship. And hopefully at the end of 18 months, we're going to be more in a relationship type of sale, a partnership, trusted advisor. And throughout the 18 months, we were building to the relational part by going through transactional efforts. There was a product or service they needed. It's delivered. We deliver high value, hopefully, or the client or the vendor or whatnot delivers really high value, goes above and beyond for those 18 months. If you do all that well, hopefully you got a sales partner for the next little while.
That's right. That's right. And this is, I think, where you and I are so incredibly aligned. It does take 18 months to build a relationship. It doesn't if you meet somebody socially and you're hanging out every week for a beer. That's a totally different relationship. But in business context, it really, really does. And I think what you are trying to do over the course of that 18 months is to demonstrate that you can be trusted, not just to sell them something, but to be a real partner and a resource in their business. And I actually believe one of the best ways you can do that is to say, I don't do what you're trying to accomplish here. Let me introduce you to somebody who I think does, and you can have a great conversation with them. Because then it doesn't say, I'm just trying to take all the business here, and I'm even trying to do things that are not my expertise, right?
I learned that lesson and why it is so important to do so a very long time ago, which was very early in my sales career. I took a deal that we were not qualified to deliver.
Done that, my man.
But as a salesperson, you just want to close the business. You just want to win. ABC, always be closing. And unfortunately, it didn't go well and it hurt and we lost the opportunity and I don't think we ever got back in there again. So that's why it's really important to do that. I actually personally, and I'll share this is one of my core things that I do, is I look for opportunity to help.
Yes.
So
I know you do.
And
I've experienced that.
It could be anything like we're working with a client, that client had a team member left. I now start calling my network going, who do you know that sits in this role or can do this job that I can introduce, right? Can I be a free recruiter for this individual, for this company? And it is that type of effort that becomes important. And back to your comment about socializing, I think that is also important. I think it's really important that as salespeople, we start to take the sales hat off and we move the relationship builder hat on. And we spend time socially with people. My wife hates this, but she says, look, I get it, a lot of your business is done at the bar. I hate that. And it sounds like we're out drinking with people, which we are. But there's a deep connection that you make with people. And this is where people want to live in this relationship economy.
Absolutely.
So what advice would you give a brand new, I'm going to flip the word sales into business developer.
Okay. Yes. I think a lot of people are, but yes.
They are. So you got, someone young, they're early in their business development career. It's year one, maybe year two. What advice would you give them?
Slow down. Just take your time and recognize that it's not going to happen overnight. Recognize that there's not a magic bullet of something that you can say or do that's going to all of a sudden snap your fingers or wave a magic wand and have you, be their salesperson forever going forward. That it's about, as you say, taking that 18 months and making the investment and doing the types of things during the course of that period that are going to add value to that business. I think that the biggest piece of advice I would give is to say, get deep into the businesses of your clients and really, really look at it from their lens and help them to use the perspective that they may not have that you have to add value in their businesses. Easier said than done, of course, but once you really do develop those deep relationships, you can see how that could happen.
Are there any new tools out there that are working really well? I know there's a lot of sales training companies out there.
Yes.
A lot of them are just rinsing and repeating. They're taking very old school ABCs, always be closing, and they're just renaming it and slapping a new sort of sticker on it and calling it. But what are some of the effective tools that we use today that we didn't once use?
Okay. I think both of these have been around for a while, but they still have a ton of merit. One is some form of pipeline management tool, right? To make sure that you are tracking and continually, touching the clients in a very methodical way. That's number one. And number two, which is tied to number one, is really some form of a CRM system, so that you can record things like not just, talk to Bob about, the widgets that may be perfect for his X application or something like that. It's about the fact that, Bob was going off to Vail over the Christmas holidays to go skiing. He usually does 3 trips a year, absolutely loves, powder. He's got a family, 3 of his kids go out with him. That's the stuff that you need to put into the CRM, right? It's not the content of the sales discussion. It's the that's right, exactly, the birthday, table stakes, my God. Yeah. Exactly.
I once, in fact, and if anyone wants to DM me, I'd be happy to send you this document. I think you've seen it. If not, I'll get it over to you as well. A very simple Excel form with a sales pipeline. Yeah. But the cells that they had created were so specific, which were things like, not just how long have we been doing business and what products are they buying, but when do they buy the volume of the products they do? Right. When are their budget cycles kicking in? What percentage of the products have grown over the years? And then a whole personal side. Who's the person? Right. What are they like? What are their interests, et cetera, et cetera. And they use that tool. It came from a client. They use that tool as your forecaster, right? Your sales planning.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about the importance of sales planning, because I think, the advice I would give someone starting out, which would be the same as yours, I just add one more, which is fail to plan, plan to fail.
Yeah, fair.
Right? Sales people the most successful salespeople, the most successful people that do business development well are disciplined, yes, planned, strategic sales folks, yes, right? They do the same thing over and over again, so they're regimented in it. They're disciplined in following through on all that sales information, because one of the worst things people go through, particularly salespeople, is a lack of filling out the CRM, right? And not planning, not strategically thinking about what am I going to do next year, who am I selling it to, is it reasonable, et cetera, et cetera. So really work that plan, I think, is important.
Right. I think you're bang on. And the funny thing is, I have yet to meet a sales leader who doesn't complain about his salespeople filling in the CRM. Right? It's just, it seems to be the antithesis of the DNA of a salesperson.
It is. Right? We know that the salesperson's personality is more, for this conversation, we're going to call it extroverted. Right. Shake hands, kiss babies, do the presentation, pitch, and now you need me to sit down and do homework. Right? And someone else should do that. Right. So what advice would you give that sales leader? He's got a group, let's say it's a sales team of 20 people. right? And I'm going to go 6 of them. Just do not put that data in the CRM and fill out the pipeline. What advice would you give that sales leader?
Right. Okay. So this is actually another thing that I believe from a leadership perspective, but it's also a sales angle as well. The stick doesn't work anymore. Nobody wants the stick, right? So if that leader was to say, look, you 6 salespeople, you got to do this or else, that's not going to motivate, right? But if that sales leader was to make a deal with those 6 individuals to say, look, just trust me for this, or humor me, right? I want you to try this for 2 months, and really and not for me, but for you and your ability to actually meet and exceed your numbers this year. Give it a shot for 2 months. And I can help coach you on some of the things that you want to record so that you can tie those into your meetings and then use them as connectors between meetings and so on. But if you could just humor me for a couple of months here, and if after a few months period of time, you're not seeing any benefit from this, then fine, I'll back off. But I believe this is for you, not for me. Right?
Yeah. So coach. Yeah.
Exactly.
And sales people sometimes don't want to be coached.
No, I
we're the most difficult to coach.
We really are. The bottom line is we just don't want to be told what to do, right? Because we think we know. That's the deal. But you raised an interesting question earlier. You said, what makes a successful salesperson in this world that we live in today? And I believe a lot of it has to do with the fact that they know they don't know everything. And therefore, they're open-minded to new techniques. Because the world is changing so quickly, the people that are holding on to the ego stake that says, I know sales, are the ones getting left behind because they're not getting any new information that's getting through that barrier. And I think that's a big deal and a differentiator between the ones who are really going to fly over the next several years and the ones who are going to be stuck in the mud.
Yeah. Do you ever remember learning who am I negotiating with? Am I negotiating with the decision maker? Am I negotiating with the end user, the advisor, and coach?
Yes.
And I think it's a Miller-Hyman actual concept. And I remember learning that years ago, and I thought, wow, this is so valuable. But today there's a new world, which is procurement. And if you're selling to big corporate, right, you are no longer dealing with in some cases, decision maker, because procurement is the one that makes it. And I hear this all the time. Every sales program that I'm in, it comes up, which is, how do we deal with procurement?
Yeah, the last one you and I were on, that came up.
Right?
That's right.
And I have a very simple answer to this because I actually end up negotiating and dealing with procurement law because we do a lot of big business. But procurement will kill the deal. Yes. They will destroy the deal. Yes. So how do we navigate procurement? What are the do's and the don'ts with procurement?
Right. I think like anything in sales, what you've really got to do is you've got to get into the shoes of the person that you're talking to, right? So these procurement people, what makes their life easy and what makes their life difficult, right? Well, a procurement person just wants to be able to have a really good reason, a really good justification for writing a check, and they don't want to have to jump through 1,000 hoops to do so. They don't want friction from the perspective of people not getting back to them or being curt or abrupt or even outright rude in some cases. And it's easy to do because procurement people are generally not relationship people.
No, they're transactional or they're informational.
Exactly. And so what ends up happening is for a salesperson, especially if you're wired to create relationships, sometimes there can be a little bit of friction there between the procurement. But it's really all about whether or not you can step into their shoes and help them do their job more effectively. That's where you're going to get.
Exactly. I just went through one recently, and it was that exact technique, or that exact approach, I should say, which was, let me move myself into this place of acknowledgement and empathy.
Yes.
And I was able to do so from a couple ways. I said, all right, the person I'm speaking to has a boss. That boss has told them, or manager, in fact, this type of organization is probably a supervisor.
Probably, yes.
this is what the terms or the procurement is. And procurement obviously is there to help manage the cash flow within the organization. It's much easier for the organization to be paying their bills in a predictable way, right? We paid on this day, we paid in this amount, this is the way we do things, et cetera, et cetera. And it was only through the empathy and the recognizing that if I fought this guy, it was only going to make his life more difficult. Right. So I leaned into him. And I said things like, first, do you have a manager that's putting pressure on you to put these terms in? He said, yes. I said, I get it. Right? And it was that one question that the guy went, okay, I don't have to be combative. Right. And all of a sudden, we now moved into a different space of conversation, which were things like, all right, where can we give and where can we take? Right. Sort of where do we have some room on things like payment terms and due dates versus amounts? And we slowly started to navigate that. So one of the sort of advices, just to add to what you were saying, is if you're in the world of sales and you're dealing with procurement, your patience and empathy need to be at the forefront of that interaction.
Absolutely. And you need to understand, and this could be different depending on the firm, but you need to understand what terms they absolutely have to have in a contract. And if you know what that is, there's no sense arguing about it, right? All that's going to do is potentially scuttle the deal and or make sure that they don't ever want to deal with you again. So you need to know where to relent on those terms and then where to say, okay, look, I understand you need to have these. But if that's the case, then maybe, we could do something over here a little bit that you might be able to bend on. Okay, sure, I can bend there. Now you're having a discussion and not any kind of conflict.
Yeah. You have a line for that it's when you teach negotiations, you teach something, which is to trade versus concede.
Oh, right. Trade versus concede, 100%.
Yeah, which is a little bit around that give and take.
That's right.
So that's good. The other advice I'd give in procurement, or the other thing I'd say with the world of procurement, is it's really important that you have an executive, a senior individual or an executive level individual that is able to, in some cases, speak on your behalf to procurement.
Yes.
Because in absence of that, the system can only do what the system does.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I think the problem that you run into there is, by very virtue of the roles, procurement people tend to be rule followers, right? Yes. And unless they have somebody senior who's saying, look, you know what, this is a good person. We really want to get this deal done. We may want to be a little flexible here or here. They're going to stick to the exact boundaries they've been given. So you're bang on there.
So, where do you think the world of sales is going? I mean, what's the future of sales look like for people?
Yeah. I could say it really depends on the industry, but I don't believe that. I really don't believe that. I really believe that the only way to separate sales right now is something that we danced around a little earlier, which is it's either a transactional sale or it's a relationship sale. A transactional sale is a one and done commodity type of thing, whereas the relationship sale is really what we've been talking about up until this point. I find transactional sales incredibly boring, so I don't even want to go there. But from a relationship sales perspective, it has a lot to do with people changing their mindset away from some of those old techniques that we've already talked about and resetting their expectations for the amount of time it's going to take and what they actually need to do to provide value over that time frame. If you are willing to put in the time and effort, I really believe that there are riches, both from a monetary and from a personal growth perspective, that are willing to be just grabbed a hold of if you're willing to put in that time. And I think that sales can become even a more rewarding career than it has been in the past for the right people. But I do believe that, the ones that hold on to this Shooter McGavin type of approach and the ABCs and the transactional type of a sale, trying to apply that to the relationship side, they're just not going to do well.
Yeah, slow down. That's what you said earlier. All right, so I think we might have asked this, but what are the common sales mistakes?
Okay. one of the big ones, and I still see it all the time, I would say this is the biggest one, is going in with your own agenda versus going in with the client's agenda, right? So an example.
It's a little bit of an oxymoron. I mean, as a salesperson, you're going in, you've got to have your agenda or your objective that you're going in with, right?
Yes, you do. Except the only agenda that a salesperson should be going in with is to better understand the agenda of the client. That's it. That's their agenda. And potentially to make sure that they've had a rich enough discussion in that meeting to be able to very seamlessly set up the next discussion. That should really be the only objective in a relationship sale. And so what I mean by an objective or my own agenda, what I'm saying is a lot of people go in and they say, okay, I want to make sure I tell them about, XYZ product and its comparison to, ABC product from the competitor. And I want to show him, the schematic of this and the graphs and the this and that, the other thing. If you go in with that objective, you can be damn sure that piece of paper is coming out of the bag, except there may not have been the right opportunity. It may not have been appropriate. The conversation may have gone in a completely different direction, and it could be jarring and off-putting if you pull out that piece of paper. So understanding the client's objective has everything to do with understanding their business, what makes them tick, what challenges they're going through, what opportunities they see, and taking a very objective view as to whether or not some of the products and services that you have can help them with their challenges and opportunities.
You sound like a sales guy, man. You sit here and you say things like, oh, you got to go in and know their agenda and know what their corporate objectives are, and you got to learn about them. So, I mean, yes, and I don't mean to be teasing.
No, it's all good, man.
But let me ask, are new opportunities, call them warm leads, willing to share what some of those corporate objectives and needs are?
Once you earn the right.
So let's talk. So we had a thing called earning the sale. So that's a great segue. Let's talk about earning the sale. What does it require? Like when we say earn the sale, like what does that mean? Like what do people have to do? How do you earn the sale?
Okay, good. I think it's like just about any relationship. You need to give before you take. So the point of the matter is that you need to find ways to add value, either through conversation, through insight, through making sure that that person that you're sitting across from feels like an individual and not a number to you before you start to get into those really deep conversations. You're right. I used to be a financial advisor, and one of the things I hated the most was when the mutual fund wholesalers would come in and say, tell me all about your business. Well, I felt like I should have just recorded a 2-minute little blurb and then just press play every time they came in, right? I don't want to have to go and describe my business to the guy in the first meeting. Now, that said, if they've been referred to me through a friend that I trust and respect, if we've already had a little bit of contact that really wasn't sales related at all, if that person and I seem to have somewhat of a connection, in terms of shared values or interests, then I would be much more willing to have the depth of that discussion.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think like any relationship, time is a factor, and how you behave and how you show up during that time is the effort and the earning that you're putting in.
Right.
And you mentioned creating value. I think one of the most important things we can walk into is into these sales interactions is, am I bringing value? Ask yourself that question. Like, do I bring value to the sales interaction? Am I bringing value to this conversation? What can I do to bring more value in the future? Because I think, we've been talking about some of our belief in sales, but there is still a world out there of you can do the hardcore, sell the pain.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, it is very easy to get someone to buy as long as you push that pain button in them.
Right.
It's manipulative.
Yes, it is.
It's ulterior. Mm-hmm. It's hidden. There's a hidden agenda, which is everything we're describing, but you can. So I think, one of the things I want to say, particularly on this podcast, is if you're listening to it and, you're in the world of business and development and sales, you have a tremendous amount of responsibility to make sure the way you conduct yourself brings shine and positive brand to the rest of us as salespeople.
Absolutely.
Because all it takes is one crappy asshole, right? To earn it,
That's right.
right? And this is going out to the people with the LinkedIn mail campaigns. I am so sick of getting your request to connect and your message saying, hi, thanks for connecting. I bet you are looking to improve your technology, your phone, your this needs. And, the reason I'm reaching out to you is because I want to learn about your business and I want to see if I'm able to bring it. Fuck off.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But the people that are doing it well are genuinely interacting with me online for a while before the ask comes in. And I do the same thing. I invest in that time as well. But it's an investment. I think salespeople, you use the word investment advisor, right? I think let's just sort of spin that a little bit. As salespeople, we are investment advisors. We need to advise people,
of course,
potential buyers, and we need to invest that time in them. This has been a good conversation so far, Brent.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It has been.
I hope if you're listening to it, it's also brought some clarity, maybe not insight, but clarity to the fact that sales, doesn't have to be hard.
Yes.
We're not in these oppositional positions where it's us against them.
Right.
It's not about me winning and them losing.
Yes.
It's not about me closing and them buying. It's about us leaning in with our service offerings or product offerings to the people that can use it.
Yes.
And it's about us also being really, really, really interested or intelligent about who else is doing what we're doing and offering that comparison as well.
Yes, exactly. And being very, very honest about when your competitors actually have advantages over you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a way to really build trust.
Yeah.
And I think that too few people do that.
I think the other thing I heard us say throughout this podcast today is gone are the days of techniques.
Yes.
Right? Now we are in the world of effort and tools and learning. We need skill.
Yes, we
right?
do.
We need interpersonal skill.
Yep.
Sometimes, we're like hairdressers and dentists and, hygienists where like people are telling us a lot of stuff.
Yep.
And invest in that. So great, man. This was a good conversation. Obviously, in the captioning, we'll put up your handles and stuff so people can also reach out to you.
Sure.
If you did want to get any more information on the Smart Sales program that we're offering at witzeducation.com. Actually, I'm going to repeat that. If you are looking for any information on the Smart Sales program that's coming up, I think we got 4 open enrollment programs this year.
Yes.
And I'll say this is exciting. We've been offering this program for years only as an on-site offer.
Right.
Just closed, customized on-site. And we get a lot of requests being like, hey, I've got one person I want to get caught up on that sales program that you did. Do you offer it in an open enrollment format? So we've had a lot of requests. We've resisted doing it because we've always exclusively held our Smart Leader program as the open enrollment program. But we do good work in that program and people develop a hell of a lot. So
absolutely,
we've launched it. Dates are on the website. You can check it out, witzeducation.com. Brent is the feature core trainer of the program. He's taking on, I think you facilitate day 2 and day 3.
That's right.
I do day 1.
Yep.
You and I both become the sales coaches with them throughout the program, and then we do a sort of capstone at the end. So the outline's on there. This was wicked. Brent, we will see you soon. Thank you very much. And thank you to the audience. Goodbye.
Yeah, looking forward to the Smart Sales program. I think it's going to be absolutely awesome.
It is. All right. We will see all of you soon. Thank you.